welcome. I'm Marnie Merriam. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Point Foundation, and I'm here today joined by Ashlyn Johnson, Point alum and founder of the Inclusion Playbook. We're excited to speak with you today about her work as well as racial justice and leadership. Ashlyn, would you give a brief introduction?
Yes, thank you so much. Again, my name is Ashlyn Johnson. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the president and founder of the Inclusion Playbook, which is a sports impact organization that works to transform communities in and through sports. A long time ago, I was a Point Scholar, and I also served on the board of the Point Foundation as well.
Well, I'm delighted to hear more about your work, and I know this year has been quite a challenge for everyone, really. I'd love to hear, how did you come up with this idea for the Inclusion Playbook? Where did this all begin? And what has this last year meant for you and your work?
So the story of the Inclusion Playbook actually starts probably in 2018. I had worked at the intersection of sports and LGBTQ rights for almost a decade. I played college sports a long time ago, and I had a passion for social justice and LGBTQ rights. And I was fortunate enough to work for one of the oldest LGBTQ sports projects at the National Center for Lesbian Rights a couple years outside of law school. Working in that space, I saw the value of leveraging the sports communities for LGBTQ inclusion. But what I noticed is that a lot of the LGBTQ organizations didn't have an understanding of the sports space, and a lot of the sports organizations didn't have an understanding of the LGBTQ social justice space or the social justice space broadly. And also a lot of the work that was being done with these sports organizations was just strictly about sexual orientation and gender identity. But a lot of the athletes wanted to work on more social justice issues such as racial justice or gender equity. And so I was working at the Human Rights Campaign, helping them with their sports work. And I decided to leave that position and was thinking about what did I want to do. And there was this gap in the space with an organization that could cater to both of those needs of, one, teaching sports organizations or sports institutions about social justice, and two, teaching social justice institutions about sports. So that's why we formed the Inclusion Playbook. I started it with somebody else who worked in the sports and social justice space named Liam, who worked with me at both Athlete Ally and HRC. And so since then, we've been working at the intersection of sports and social justice, and focusing on not only LGBTQ work, but racial justice, gender equity, economic justice, and a broad spectrum of social justice issues in sports.
So when you mention all of those causes, the LGBT community, racial injustice, sports isn't the first thing that comes to mind for me. I would say it's not, the sports world is not one that really is known for the social justice movement. What are some of the techniques you've used to work with those organizations and to bring to light some of these important movements?
Yeah, when we first started, we started at the end of 2018 and really tried to start working with sports institutions in early 2019. At that point, it was really hard to convince them to work in the social justice space. A lot of the sports institutions were very scared of what would it mean for their fan base if they worked in social justice. Even though some athletes, especially in the WNBA and the National Women's Soccer League, were speaking out on issues, you weren't really seeing the social justice movement wade into that space. An exception was the NBA, who took a stand on HB2. And we saw that they got a lot of backlash, especially after Donald Trump won. And so what that meant is it kind of threw water on a lot of the organizations that were just thinking about doing social justice work. A lot of that changed, especially 2020 and late 2019, where you saw more athletes speaking up. And in 2020, especially with COVID, you saw more athletes doing social justice work as well. And the institutions realizing that there was a strong business case for doing this work not just because their athletes wanted to do it, but because people actually were they were hungry for their brands and their institutions to do more social justice work. They saw a big influx of fans with the WNBA for doing their social justice work, and then they saw a big influx for National Women's Soccer League as well. So one of the ways that we try to leverage the like really good things that we were seeing is just telling sports organizations that they weren't getting any type of income from their events because events weren't happening with COVID. So they were losing a lot of revenue there. So it was, how can they still remain socially relevant in a climate where they could not compete in events? And one of the biggest things they could do with their staff is do DEI training, because that caused more people to become engaged with them socially, even though they weren't competing in events. So we went from, in 2020, a lot of contracts being canceled because of COVID. And then maybe in a 2-month span of just doing free events for sports leagues and them seeing how many people were interested, we doubled our business because they could then see that there was a strong, compelling case for them to do this work. Does that make sense?
It does. I think you bring up a really good point about the business case behind embracing social justice movements. And we also know with some of these big sports organizations, they're made up of huge groups of humans and individuals. What are some techniques that you use in this space to manage conversations, some of the harder conversations around behavior, around differing viewpoints, to help kind of shift mindsets for those individuals?
The thing about sports is it's an institution that lends itself to social justice or even like equity arguments. So like sports is this place that even though people might not participate in it, people like they love it. Like we often talk that like sports is a religion. And so there are these values of sports that everyone kind of identifies with, such as like inclusion. There's supposed to be this equal playing field that everyone is supposed to be welcome. So you have that aspect of sports, that's that idealistic aspect. But then you have the other aspect that no one really likes to talk about, that sports is a business. And that sports generates billions of dollars a year because people love it so much. And so one way that they have to keep that revenue coming in is to keep people loving sports as a religion. So they don't want to go that far into being outside of what the realm of equity is, because then it kind of like tears the cover off that illusion that this is more than just this glorious space or institution, but it's also business. So there are two ways that we work with sports institutions to convince them to like what we feel is to do the right thing. That's one, we tap into that need for them or that love of sports that a lot of people in the sports industry have. So it's like, if you love sports, don't you want to grow it and don't you want to share it? And for a lot of people, that's enough to do the right thing. Once they realize that a policy they have or a stance or a position that they're taking is going to harm people in their community, they want to change their behavior because they love that sport and they want to grow it. And then you have another group of people that know that sports is a business, and you have to make several different cases to them. And one is it's the right legal thing to do, or you might get sued if you have the wrong policy, or it just makes good business sense to grow your fan base. There are a lot of members, especially in the LGBTQ community, who are looking for safe and inclusive sports to either participate in or to be spectators of. And so when you have inclusive sports spaces, you can grow your revenue because you're reaching different fan bases. And the best way to do that is to convince that group that you are invested in them as individuals. And the best way to do that is to speak out on issues they care about.
I had the opportunity recently to tune into one of your Inclusion Playbook webinars, and I was super surprised to see the breadth of sports organizations who are truly invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you have a favorite client story or interesting case that you've worked on with some of these sports organizations that you could share?
Yeah, one of the our we get really lucky for our first client. It actually ended up being the NBA. I had worked with them before and worked with them in the LGBT inclusion space, and they wanted to work together to go back to North Carolina after HB2, and they were trying to figure out how do they go back into the community in a positive way. Like they wanted to have a positive local impact. So we work with them to identify local LGBTQ groups that they could partner with when they were in the city. We went to an organization called Time Out Youth, which is an LGBTQ youth shelter, and got to do this great tour with the kids there with NBA players. NBA staff came, like the person who runs their social responsibility office came. Jason Collins, also associated with Point Foundation, was there and gave a great speech. Then we were able to go to another school and do an LGBTQ inclusion program along with the racial justice program. So we were able to do intersectional work, and they donated a significant amount of money to the community. And that was a great experience because it was one of the few times I can say that I've been able to work on a local level that had a national impact. They were able to actually impact the youth that were in North Carolina, especially Charlotte, North Carolina. And then the entire nation can see like what you can do with sports to actually do something good in communities and try to make the best of what was a really bad situation in North Carolina.
Thank you. Really hit an important point there. Sports is something near and dear to me growing up, and that community that it builds, and being able to um, work within those communities and the intersection around kind of social justice movements is really, really important work. Now, I have to ask, do you have a favorite NBA team?
Wow, can I say that?
I
Hmm.
won't tell anyone.
I'm more of a WNBA person.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm more of a WNBA person, and it would be the Mystics. I live in DC, so I know I should say the Wizards for my favorite NBA team, but I'm mostly into players, and I'm a big LeBron James fan. But as far as teams go, I would go to WNBA Mystics all the way.
Nice. Nice. I have to say, I'm a Warriors fan. I'm based in Oakland, so they're my home team. Even though they moved to the city, we won't talk about that.
They do
Um,
a lot of great social justice work. Steph Curry, their coach, Steve Kerr, just amazing spokespeople when it comes to inclusion, especially LGBTQ inclusion in sports and gender equity. So, from that standpoint, I'm a Warriors fan too.
nice. I love to hear that. You've managed to grow your business and really launch this inclusion playbook at a time when these issues have been at the forefront of a lot of very public conversations. As a queer Black woman, did you ever find yourself overwhelmed or exhausted throughout this journey?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I feel like for the last year, I've been exhausted every day, but I think that's everyone in a way. But there's something about this work, especially since it's diversity work, that I think that what makes me good at it is living at those intersections of being a Black queer former athlete. Um, but I also think that makes the work a little draining too, because it's like, okay, you're supposed to bring your full self to work. That is the benefit, or one of the benefits you're bringing to the organization is that you understand these spaces. But it's also like you can never really leave work at work either. One, because we're all working at home, and two, because I live at those intersections, and so a client may be talking to me about what is an issue that seems like an external issue for them. It's internal for the organization, but they could be talking about it in a very academic way, or a way that how do we deal with this from a business perspective or from a PR perspective, um, and not fully realize that the incident that they're describing to me deeply impacts me as a human being, and that I'm not just looking for a solution to help their business, but also for like a solution to help myself and society. And having those conversations back to back sometimes with clients can be draining. Um, And so, in on one sense, it's great that we have more business, and it's great that people are looking at these issues. But I do have a lot of concern about the people who work in the space, if they don't have the ability to rest and recharge.
What are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself, and things you might recommend others do at this time?
Um, a lot of it is just like recognizing that I'm tired and being okay with it. I do think that probably something that a lot of point scholars experience, especially since point scholars are high achieving, is this notion that you always have to be productive and measuring your days by your levels of productivity. And so I have to be very much aware of making sure that narrative doesn't creep in. Like, I can have unproductive days, that's fine. Like, some weeks are going to be more productive than others, and that's okay. But just having that inner voice, just telling yourself, like, yes, you feel this, but it's okay to feel it. And tomorrow may be the same, but the next day may be different. And so it's a lot of self-talk in that way. Some of the more concrete things I do is I have a cat, and so I'll sit and watch the cat stare out the window and wonder what it's like to only have to worry about staring out the window. Or I'll watch really bad TV, like really bad crime dramas.
Agreed. I think giving yourself permission to do those things and to take that time is it's really important, especially as you said, when we're all always on and always available to connect. No, obviously you are a Point alumni. I would love to hear more about kind of your Point journey and what that was like for you, and how it's been since you've kind of moved on.
Yeah, I was a Point Scholar. This is up for debate, either 2009 or 2010. But I was in law school at the time, and my experience, I mean, I know it's different from the scholars now, especially because we could do everything in person. My experience was great. I was in the South, so it was really just different having a network of LGBTQ peers that I could reach out to at any point. And so a few times we had in-person convenings. I'm not sure if they still do the in-person convenings. They might do them online, but I was able to connect with a lot of people who are still my friends today. Um, and I still keep in contact with a lot of people in my cohort, either just if I'm in certain cities, connecting with them, or a lot of times it's on the professional level. Before I start any type of like job hunt, or even before I hire someone on, I usually reach out to my Point network to see if they know anything about the organization or the person, or see if they have any leads to any individuals that would be great to work with the organization. And whenever I'm making any type of big professional decision, I reach out to my Point network. I had maybe an unusual trajectory with Point because I went from scholar to alum, and then immediately I was on the board, which was also a great experience working with such a dedicated group of people. And then I was off the board and I came back to the board. Again, great experiences, but my second time I was on the board, I was thinking more so about doing my own thing. And I was able to just bounce ideas off of a lot of the established business people in the Point network. Like, I had never run a business before, I'd never done my own thing. But a lot of people who are on the board or higher up in the Point network were able to give me really good feedback and help me figure out how to navigate the space. So for Point, it's been both personal and professional for me.
I too boomeranged back to Point Foundation after I left, so I totally understand the draw that this organization has. And it does sound like the way you described it, the network has kind of grown and supported with you, as well as been supported by you throughout your journey. For current scholars, what advice might you give them, or what best practices would you share?
I think it's important to know that everybody at Point wants you to succeed. They want to set you up for success, and This is personally and professionally. Um, as a scholar and as an alum, they want to set you up for success. And they've spent years creating an extensive network to help do just that. Um, so my advice would be to utilize this network, to utilize the resources. This isn't just about attending the events. It's about connecting with each other and making sure that even outside of the organized point events that you're reaching out to the network. And don't be afraid to do it. Initially, I thought that when people were like saying, reach out if you have any needs or any questions, I thought they were just being kind or polite. But once I started doing it, I realized that people really did want you to reach out, that they felt like a sense of pride with helping you get to the next level. And so a lot of your point cohort are going to go off to do amazing things. So connect and stay in touch. And then when you see someone who's in the point network that's doing what you want to do, don't hesitate to reach out. Everybody here wants to help you succeed.
You have done some amazing work with the Inclusion Playbook and the work you're doing with kind of social justice reform. I'm curious, what's next for you? What's your vision for the future?
Whoa. That's why I didn't prepare for, Marty.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's one of the ones.
We can put that one on pause. We can put that on pause.
Yeah. That's like the future post-COVID. Just to get outside.
So you were talking about like, you're like, oh, all up leveling, and I'm like, I want to know where Ashlyn's going next. Like, so
Ashlyn's going outside on a bike, on a patio, on a trip.
Oh my gosh, yes. Absolutely, yes. Let's keep it real. I think that's more important than thinking about the next 5-year trajectory.
Yeah, and that is one thing that like last year taught me, because like this is not where I thought I would be, and I'm very happy to be here. And I remember like getting advice from so many people like right before I left law school. I'm like, okay, how do I I want to be a director at this organization. What do I need to do? And they all kept on saying the same thing. They're like, do what you love, be passionate about it, and be open to opportunities. I'm like, okay, they're just giving me really just vague advice because they don't want to tell me something concrete. And every mentor gave me that same advice. And it took me until I became a director at that organization and realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do, to realize that they were giving me exactly the right advice, that it's important to really be passionate about what you do and be open to opportunities and experiences. Because when you do that, like so many different doors just open up, and it's sometimes frustrating to not get a concrete plan on what you should do. But from my experience, like anything that has been planned just hasn't gone the way that I thought it would go. And I've been more happy and more successful when I'm just passionate about what I do.
Ashlyn, it's been a pleasure speaking with you and learning about the Inclusion Playbook and your social justice leadership work. For anyone who's interested in following up and either connecting with myself or Ashlyn or learning more about this initiative, please reach out to Emma or Jonathan at Point Foundation. Thank you again.
All right. And thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing from some of you.